Namaskar and welcome to Diplomatic Dispatch. I'm your host, Vikas, Swarup. On the 11th of April, the Foreign and Defense Ministers of India and the United States met in Washington, D.C. for the fourth 2+2 meeting. It was preceded by a virtual meeting between President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. As the two countries celebrate 75 years of diplomatic relations, we take a deep dive into India's ties with the United States. Perhaps no other area of Indian foreign policy has seen a more dramatic transformation than India's relationship with the United States. From being estranged democracies for decades during the Cold War, India and the US have become deeply engaged democracies, particularly in the last 20 years. From a time when the US had imposed sanctions on India in the wake of the 1998 nuclear tests to the 2008 Indo-US nuclear deal, which ended India's nuclear isolation, shows the distance India-US ties have traveled. The US now also supports India's permanent membership in a reformed UN Security Council, as well as India's entry to the Nuclear Suppliers Group. The two countries enjoy a comprehensive global strategic partnership covering almost all areas of human endeavor, driven by shared democratic values, growing convergence of strategic interests, and vibrant people-to-people contacts underpinned by the 4.2 million strong Indian diaspora in the US. Regular exchanges at the leadership level have been an integral element of the expanding bilateral engagement. Since assuming office in May 2014, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has visited the US 6 times. He attended the Quad Leaders Summit in person last year in Washington, D.C., besides attending 2 other virtual Quad summits with President Biden, as well as summits on climate change, democracy, COVID-19, and supply chain resilience. India-US defense cooperation has also blossomed, reaching the level of a major defense partnership in 2016. The two countries now conduct more bilateral exercises with each other than they do with any other country, and there is increasing cooperation in counter-terrorism, counter-narcotics, cybersecurity, and maritime security. The US is the largest trading partner of India with respect to merchandise trade, with trade in goods touching $113 billion in 2021. A new dimension is that the US now also provides 8% of India's oil imports. In terms of investment, the US replaced Mauritius as the second largest source of FDI into India during 2020-2021, with inflows of $13.82 billion. Indian companies have also invested more than $22 billion in the US and employ nearly 125,000 people. Climate cooperation is an important facet of the India-US partnership. In April 2021, the US and India launched the US-India Climate and Clean Energy Agenda 2030 partnership, and the US has joined the International Solar Alliance. There is heightened collaboration in science, technology, and space. The COVID-19 pandemic has allowed the two countries to explore more meaningful and ambitious health partnerships in vaccine production than have ever been attempted. The scientists of the two countries have already jointly developed the Rotavac vaccine against rotavirus, which causes severe diarrhea in children. The US is one of the most favored destinations for higher education and currently hosts more than 200,000 Indian students. To more fully explore this multifaceted partnership and the 2+2 meeting, I am now joined by 2 outstanding experts. Ambassador Arun Singh has been India's ambassador to the United States, Israel, and France during his distinguished 37-year career in the Indian Foreign Service. He has taught at the American University and the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University. He was also a distinguished visiting professor at Emory University and the Center for Advanced Study of India at the University of Pennsylvania. Mr. Pramit Chaudhuri is the foreign editor of the Hindustan Times with 3 decades of experience in tracking international politics and economics. He is also fellow of the Ananta Aspen Center and served 2 terms from 2011 to 2015 on the National Security Advisory Board of India. Let me begin with you, Ambassador Singh. What is the significance of India and the US convening the 2+2 meeting at this point in time?
So holding this meeting at this point of time, as you asked, Vikas, and the manner in which it was conducted and the outcomes of the meeting have been very, very significant. Because right now, the focus of the world, including the United States, is on the Russia-Ukraine crisis. And therefore, for them to take the time out to hold this meeting and to convene the foreign and defense ministers of both the countries, because they have very tight schedules. And not only that, before this meeting started, President Joe Biden convened a virtual meeting with the Indian Prime Minister in the presence of the 4 ministers. Now, this is very unusual, because normally when the 2+2 is held, then the ministers who are there call on the Prime Minister of India or the President of US, depending on where the meeting is taking place. But for the two leaders to also hold a virtual summit and give guidance to the deliberations is again something new. And it was an indication that they attach a lot of importance to the relationship. And I think the message that came out was that despite the differences over Ukraine or situation related to Russia's role in Ukraine, both attach a lot of value to the bilateral relationship and to the global partnership and want to advance that.
Pramit, as Ambassador Singh said, the long shadow of Russia was visible in the 2+2 meeting, as we saw in the differing readouts on Ukraine from the two foreign ministers after the meeting. Do you think both sides have shown willingness to understand each other's stand on Ukraine? And with the Quad summit next month in Tokyo, do you expect more pressure will be mounted on India?
Yeah, I think that Ambassador Singh is completely correct. The purpose of the 2+2 is basically to make it clear that whatever differences there may be over India's Ukraine policy, the fundamentals of the relationship, which arise around the common views on China and the Indo-Pacific in particular, but a much larger and expanding economic relationship, remain untouched. In the same way, and in many ways, I would argue what the differences on Ukraine are far less than, for example, the problems we used to face on issues like Pakistan and Kashmir. Biden, for example, canceled his ASEAN summit, the US ASEAN summit, the Association for Southeast Asian Nations summit that was scheduled in early April, had rescheduled it to May because he simply didn't have the bandwidth because of the Ukraine crisis. But on India and the 2+2, as was mentioned, not only did they go ahead, in many ways they made it even more, built a higher profile around it. But what I've heard is at the highest level now, at the cabinet, at the principals level in the US government, there is no more pressure on India.
Excellent. Now, Ambassador Singh, let's turn the focus to India-US defense ties. How have they progressed? And what has the Defense Technology and Trade Initiative achieved in the 10 years since it was launched?
Because defense ties have come a long way. You may recall that till about 2008, India hardly bought any defense supplies from the US. But after we did the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement in 2008, that enabled higher level technology cooperation and release of higher level technologies. And because of that, defense ties started to expand. So already we have done almost $20 billion worth of defense purchases from the US. Now they are talking more and more of co-development and co-production. So in fact, if you saw the joint statement that came out after the 2+2, not only is there a reference to co-development, but co-production, but also of being able to test new systems in each other's facilities and the sharing of information. In fact, again, in the 2+2 meeting that was held, they have signaled that they will intensify sharing of information and they will cooperate in all dimensions of defense, including cyber and space.
Pramit, another emerging and very important area of collaboration between India and the US is in critical and emerging technologies. Now, what are these technologies and why are they critical to the future of India-US ties?
At the heart of that is the issue of China. China is pretty clear, I think, in its own public statements and its own internal discussions that the future of international geopolitics is going to be around the domination of certain crucial technologies. America, India, the Quad members, Japan and Australia, and other countries recognize or who are wary of allowing China to control that space, except that we have to work together to ensure that does not happen. The Quad, for example, at the heart of it is really almost 25 critical and strategic technologies that the members want to work together on. AUKUS, there are a whole set of technologies there. India is not a member, but I think we are eyeing some of the technology segments on the AUKUS understanding between the US, Australia, and now we're looking at possibility of Japan considering joining AUKUS as well. So these are the core of what will really determine the future of global geopolitics.
So then we are looking really at things like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotechnology, stuff like that. Ambassador Singh, I'm sure you played a part in bringing these technologies to the radar of India-US ties when you were ambassador there. Would you like to also come in?
Thanks, Vikas. So both then and recently, I did a project on potential for collaboration between India and US in critical and emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, quantum, biotech, cyber, 6G, and space. And as part of this, I held consultations with government departments, with the Indian private sector, the US private sector. And it clearly emerged that there is a lot of potential for cooperation. And it's a new area, and this is going to completely transform the way we live, the way we work, and it's important, therefore, to energize this cooperation. For example, if you take quantum, not many universities still know what to teach in quantum that will be relevant. And therefore, the demand will very often emerge from industry as to what they're looking at. So, for example, some of the key US companies who are active in quantum are providing support to Indian universities to teach quantum science in India, because they also want, there's a shortage of skills on both sides in quantum. So they also want to develop skills that will be available also to industry in both countries.
Now, Ambassador Singh, the US administration is required under its domestic law, countering America's adversaries through Sanctions Act, CAATSA, to impose sanctions on any country that has significant transactions with Iran, North Korea, or Russia. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said at the 2+2 meeting that the US has not yet made a determination on potential sanctions or waivers to India under CAATSA law for its purchase of the S-400 missile defense system from Russia. So is this a sword of Damocles hanging over India?
Well, I would say that it is not a sword of Damocles hanging over India, but hanging over the India-US relationship, unless the US handles it in a certain way. And because you'll recall that CAATSA was not an initiative of US administration as such. It was an initiative of US Congress under the Trump administration, because they wanted to tie down the hands of President Trump, because they felt that President Trump was perhaps, in some way had been helped by Russia in his elections in 2016, and they want to move forward with Russia. And so the Congress tried to tie down his hands. And so I think the US administration understands that the relationship between India and the United States is really a new relationship. It's a 2-decade relationship. And you need to build confidence in this relationship. You remember that Secretary Blinken said on several occasions during the joint press conference after the 2+2 meeting that India built its relationship with Russia at a time when US was not willing to be that kind of a partner for it. But now US is willing to be that kind of a partner. So if at this stage, US feels the compulsion to do any kind of sanctions on India because of what India buys from Russia, India will do what it needs to do in its national interest. But it will start generating once again a sense of whether can we really have confidence in the US relationship? Can we really be confident that the US will be there when we need them at critical time? Now, US wants to give that assurance, because Secretary Blinken himself said that we are now able and willing to be that kind of partner. Now, if you're able and willing to be that kind of partner, then don't sanction the relationship. So I think they have to approach it in a more forward-looking way and find a way not to impose the CAATSA sanction.
Ambassador Singh, the US pivot to Asia was a signature foreign policy move under the Obama administration. Now it is the Quad and AUKUS which have emerged as the linchpins of the US's engagement in the Indo-Pacific. But will the US pivot to Asia be upended by the war in Ukraine?
The sense I get that right now the Americans are feeling that there is a growing coordination between Russia and China. And, the director CIA, for example, spoke a couple of days ago at the Georgia Institute of Technology, where he said that China has emerged as a silent partner to Russia in what Russia is doing in Ukraine. As they see it, of course, there is the European theatre, the Indo-Pacific theatre, but there's increasing talk in US strategic circles of a common Eurasian challenge to the United States, and therefore challenge from Russia and China. And China itself, many argue, has reached Europe. It has presence in ports in Europe. It has reached Europe through the Arctic. Earlier, it reached Europe through trains, through Russia, which have, of course, been disrupted at the moment. So I think right now, I think the message from the US is that they will need to focus on both challenges. Otherwise, they will not achieve their objectives.
Ambassador Singh, the chaotic US withdrawal from Afghanistan in August last year had left India high and dry. Are India and the US now on the same page with regard to Afghanistan?
Well, I wouldn't say they're on the same page because, ultimately we found that US takes decisions based on its own interests, based on its political compulsions. And there was no willingness in US society and polity to sustain any further their engagement in Afghanistan. Large number of people had died, there were disrupted families, there were injured soldiers, and they felt that they were not achieving their objective. Even if the US were pulling out, they should have worked to provide for enduring governance and security institutions in Afghanistan, so that the gains of 20 years were not lost. And that clearly they were not able to do. And that's something, because again, for us, there is an enhanced worry about terrorism emanating from Afghanistan, about Pakistan and the ISI using Afghanistan soil again for training terrorists for attacks against India. So that concern is there. But I think if you watch now, the US, while trying to provide humanitarian assistance so that they're not criticized because of whatever is the difficult situation in Afghanistan, has withheld any kind of formal legitimization of the Taliban, and put some markers in terms of women's rights, rights of girls for education, treatment of ethnic minorities, and inclusive government. So on these issues, I think there is some convergence between India's approach and the US approach.
Pramit, many experts say that it is China's belligerence, whether on India's borders or in the Indo-Pacific, that is contributing to the increasing strategic convergence between India and the US. How important is the China factor, in your opinion?
China is definitely seen by both New Delhi and Washington as their primary strategic threat and economic and technological rival. That's a really strong point of convergence. And what is interesting about the China threat and the common perception of the China threat is that it is not just about Chinese troops or Chinese warships threatening the soldiers and the navies of either country. It's about technology. It's about the rules that will define the future of the world. So China helps provide a strategic bedrock, a foundation upon which all the other issues, the economics, the technology, immigration policy even, are built on top of. And it's really it's like the glue that holds together all these other issues. And for America, and I think it's very clear, you see what Biden says, you see what their documents say, India is absolutely essential to the American response to China, and the US is absolutely essential to our response to China.
There is another Quad which has received relatively less attention, and that is the partnership between the US, India, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates, which would have been unthinkable even 5 years ago. What are the challenges and opportunities for this West Asia Quad?
The Americans are clearly withdrawing from the Persian Gulf, and the United Arab Emirates is leading a process by which to build an alternative structure in that area, but one that is built around technology, economics, trade, and connectivity, and a little bit of security. So this new Quad, in effect, is an attempt by the UAE to put together various strands. One of those strands is a trade, food, agriculture, technology corridor that it's building with India. This plus technology, finance, is where the UAE is putting this together, and this is where this Quad comes in. Unlike the other Quad, it's not a response to China, but it is about building an alternative structure in the 21st century for a region that is definitely very important to India.
What role does the Indian diaspora play in India-US ties?
I think the Indian diaspora plays a very important role. The number is now a little over 4 million. You can see that they're playing a greater role in politics, in administration. The Vice President of the US is a person of Indian origin. There are today 5 members in US Congress who are persons of Indian origin. And while they may have certain differences related to politics in India, but they are advocates of a stronger India-US partnership. There are an increasing number of people in the US administration who are persons of Indian origin. Or if you look at CEOs of companies, Microsoft, Google, IBM, Adobe, MasterCard, many of the major US companies are led by persons of Indian origin. So we do have a tremendous potential of utilizing this strength for advancing the India-US relationship. Of course, there are differences within the community in the US, as there are political differences also in India. Some have been critical from time to time of steps that the Indian government has been taking, not just now, but across earlier period, earlier decades also. So that's a challenge that, of course, we have to deal with. But then you saw the event that Prime Minister Modi did in Houston, with the presence of 50,000 strong Indian origin community. And President Trump came for that event. And it was very unusual for a US president to go to an event being done for a visiting foreign leader. And obviously he went there because he saw some advantage in reaching out to the Indian origin community in the United States, either for votes or for funding for his election. And when he came to India in 2020, he went to Ahmedabad, where there were, gathering of 100,000 people to welcome him. So I think there is a recognition on both sides that the Indian origin community, which has established itself now well in the US, has capacity to contribute to the deepening of the India-US partnership.
Thank you, gentlemen, for enlightening our viewers on the many strands in the India-US partnership. The 2+2 meeting has sent out the message that India and the US remain natural and trusted partners who can also handle divergences with tact. But it is the many convergences between the two countries that makes the India-US partnership a force for good. Both countries will continue to promote a resilient, rules-based international order that safeguards sovereignty and territorial integrity, upholds democratic values, and promotes peace and prosperity for all. Thank you for watching Diplomatic Dispatch. Till we meet again next week, good night and goodbye.